what was it about the U.S. Constitution that failed? I mean, it was designed to be and remain decentralized and not have a central bank. You mentioned that it took 3 attempts to get the central bank in. So, like, where did we go wrong?
I think largely the rights and freedoms enumerated in the Constitution and the processes, the tricameral system, largely didn't fail. It's humanity that failed and our inability to enforce it, because even Andrew Jackson challenged the legality and constitutionality of a central bank. And because the Supreme Court at that time was bought and paid for by this interest, they ruled that it was constitutional. So I would make a distinction between whether it's the documents, contents, and infrastructure that failed versus just pure humanity. Because you go from then to now. I mean, it's laughable how much they step on the Constitution every day that they possibly can, they being politicians. Yeah. Like it largely is almost out of the hands of the central bankers, as active and direct as it was then, right? You had Frank Vanderlip, who conveniently was related to the Rockefellers, right? Who then ushered in laws to where the banks didn't have to follow the federal laws, and then poof, 5 years later, there's the Aldrich Plan, which was the Federal Reserve Act. Why did they call it the Aldrich Plan? Because they couldn't sell the Federal Reserve Act to the politicians. And then they did it December 23, 1913. Nobody's there to even vote on it. So like then you back that out to then understand what they did between Andrew Jackson largely doing all of us a favor, getting rid of the central bank at his peril. The media, which was owned by them now, or then as it is now, you know, the credit was contracted on purpose out of the Bank of England. Trade and commerce declined. They tried to come at Americans 3 ways from Sunday to not allow them to vote for Jackson a second time because they knew it would be the death knell. But the common agrarian citizen of America had too much honor and pride to go down that route. And they knew, okay, it's almost like we're putting our bootstraps on. Jackson's got our back, and we're going with him because we all agree that this is not for us.
Yeah. So what the common agrarian man, they understood then the risk perhaps of central banking. They knew a little bit more about the nature of money at the time. Like, tell me about that. So they were buying into Andrew Jackson like as their leader to resist this implementation of a central bank. Based on what? Was it based on religious faith? What is it?
It's a combination. Like you can argue that Pentecostal Christianity or pilgrims, right? They have a certain view of work ethic, a certain view of honor and loyalty, and a certain view of an anti-usury position of money, right? To them, and largely this is one of the definitions of what is money. To them, money was just a transactable modality of labor.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a good base layer of understanding of what is money. So they knew that, okay, the War of the Roses, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, it was all financed and money made on both sides. It was never really about just a pure land grab or pure ag grab or technology. It was always to confiscate wealth. So I think they had that awareness coming over to the States. They fought both the same generation. This is key because when you're looking at generations set up by four turnings,
fought the Revolutionary War.
You have the first generation Americans, and then second fighting 1776 and the War of 1812.
Right.
Largely, why the globalists hate Russia is for their assistance to the United States in the War of 1812, which the history books now bill it as kind of like the French and Indian Wars Part 2. But no, it was a war against the central banks again. So I think you have one generation removed from those men that fully understood what the battle was about. Largely, there was a lot of sacrifice to get there, and they weren't just going to go quietly for ease, comfort, and luxury.
Right.
And that's why America, was pushing west and settling and had monstrous GDP growth.
These are the hard men that created good times. Basically.
That's it, man.
Yeah,
I mean.
So obviously the War of 1776 is the American Revolution from England. The War of 1812, though, can you say more about that? How's that involved?
It's largely kind of mulled over, but effectively you had the expiry of the first bank charter. They issued charters.
This is the first bank of the
National
United States.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
so the
this
first
is-
attempt at a central bank in the U.S. expired.
Right. And so poof, we have a war.
Yeah.
And largely, you have that through the Panic of 1819. This was all conditions that were set up by European banksters to pulverize America, both with a standing army from England and by financial conditions to get them to acquiesce to their authority.
Right.
And they fought and won again.
Wow. And what is the traditional narrative about the War of 1812? This is between, I'm not.
It's the narrative still, it's U.S. versus England.
Okay.
But largely, at least in the high school and collegiate history books, it gets muddied with all these tangential stories about the French and Indian Wars, which were largely occurring in Canada.
Okay.
Now, one of the greatest travesties of mankind's history happened shortly after. As we're moving west, we decimated the indigenous Native Americans, which obviously is horrible.
We committed a genocide, yes.
Yeah, it was full-on genocide that no human being should be proud of. But that actually occurred after the War of 1812.
Yeah.
So I don't see those as correlated. And I think why they want you to really overlook that battle is to not understand that the whole fight has been against them. And that for a brief period, and largely Civil War was about this too, right? And the central banksters killed Lincoln. Like, John Wilkes Booth was an agent of the central banksters. This was always about control of this area. And I think largely now you can look at it as a control of the West, because you have Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, and the United States, and Western values, Western culture. You've had every central bank, which is all answering to the Bank of International Settlements. We could get into that hierarchy for your listeners if you want. And all of the free peoples of the planet are under their ownership, both legal in maritime law, and people should look that up, and with assets.
Right.
And that's how you fast forward to now and you get, you'll own nothing and be happy. And they can say that with strength because they know it's true.
Yes. Okay, we have a video about that we want to play, but I think we should build towards this. So we had the first Bank of the United States. It expired.
Come and go. And that was under Alexander Hamilton.
Okay.
And so there was a big battle, anti-federalist, federalist. This was Jeffersonian versus Hamilton. Now, you could debate whether Hamilton was in on it, whether it was an affair. I'm not here to relitigate that. I want to know the data, the evidence, and the facts. And the reality of it is that he convinced enough members of the revolutionary founding force that, hey, we need a bank to pay for stuff for our war. All right, it can be as benign as that. Well, of course, once that was set up, naturally, because of the nature of commerce, you had national banks that then were basically only in New York and Massachusetts. We like to call money center banks that were financed, backed, and capitalized by these same European-based interests. So naturally, you were going to get a bleeding in of this force, regardless of the genesis of the first Bank of the United States. And then because it was nefarious and bad for the people, ultimately, and George Washington was massively against it, you got, okay, we letting that charter expire, poof, War of 1812, Panic of 1819. And what did they do? So up until then, it's important to understand what type of commerce occurred in the United States. We actually, obviously, we had slavery, and this was slavery of all ethnicities producing cotton, indentured Irish, Chinese, Black, African, all different, Slavic, all different types of slaves and indentured servants were using the cotton to send to Europe, and because Europe was a textile haven, right? So our trade was 80% agrarian at that time. And so by nature, what does that make the monetary flow? It makes it seasonal.
Okay.
So that seasonality and a concentration of that wealth just in the colonies from a production standpoint put us at risk, right? And then the money-centered interest in Europe, the banksters, as soon as we got weak, they would come in, send an army. And luckily, there was enough good men and strong men to fight both times they came after us, which first one was 1776, second one 1812. And then Jackson, having known all of this history from all of the founding fathers' heirs, which largely you can't find anymore now, which is a topic for another discussion. Largely the forefathers' heirs are gone.
What do you mean by that? The
It's hard
data.
to find their lineage.
Oh, their actual lineage.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's and I don't mean to introduce a whole different tangent here, but regardless, Jackson was well aware. He was a general, and he was a hard ass, and he knew about this interest. Right, largely greater than probably anybody other than Washington was on the front line of every battle, essentially against this interest, and then Madison and Jefferson, and you did have this is going a little back and forth, but you did have a battle really by the pure patriots who were for the Articles of Confederation, the United States' first founding document, largely in my opinion, the greatest decentralized document of government in our entire history. I would vote to go back to that in 10 seconds. Effectively, it's states' rights, pure states' rights, right? No centralized octopus.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
No standing army,
Right.
yada, yada, yada. So Jackson was a master at all of that awareness up until his time. He didn't give two F's about popularity. He knew that if we go this way, all of the fighting that they had just done for 2 generations is out the window. And you could really cite the beginning of the Civil War, which is 20 plus years after him, period, as them instigating that as well.
Wow. I think this is a family seal. I'm not sure. It just came to mind as you were saying that. I want to say it was Benjamin Franklin had on this seal that rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God.
Yeah, I love that.
So this was the defining activity of these men's lives, right? Was trying to resist and remove themselves from tyranny. Sounds like this tyranny comes in different forms, though, right? It's both, well, there was the direct tyranny of the actual English empire, basically. But then even after they had rebuked that direct tyranny, there continued to be attempts financially. You said they were attacking their seasonality. So I guess in these agrarian societies, they would have a lot of money come in when the cash crops were harvested, but then they would have nothing to sell in the intervening period.
Right.
And that's when England would attack, you're saying?
Yeah. And then, poof, illiquidity comes, we raise interest rates, and then, we're not going to order from you. And largely, so why America never had taxes until post FDR, right? Which taxes are not constitutional. The IRS is illegal, et cetera. I hope everybody knows that already. Was primarily finance. How was the federal government financed? Through tariffs and land sales.
Yeah.
That's how it was financed. And so what would occur during 1819 was 1907. 1907 was specific to taking out other competing banking interests at the state level and at the trust level. But effectively, when vulnerability of illiquidity came, and we're gonna fuel the credit creation when we can, profit off that, and then when there's a credit contraction or a liquidity draw, we're gonna just take and confiscate,
make it worse,
and then we're gonna time raising interest rates, and we're gonna time not giving loan extensions, not allowing collateral transfers, because we are going to confiscate.
So you're describing a centralized interest of some kind, a centralized money interest coming out of Europe and trying to get a toehold in this newly established, decentralized constitutional republic called the United States. Can you say more about what that, is there a label we can put to that centralized money interest, or is this just certain people that were in power at the time?
I mean, it's still in power now. It is the central bankers, right?
Okay, so the shareholders of central banks, basically.
Yeah, and largely today, you can break it down to the few banks that own equity in it in the United States, like J.P. Morgan, B of A, Bank of New York Mellon, et cetera. And then there's the 6 families at the top, and there are various subsidiary families, and then the organizations below them. But essentially, the Central Bank of Central Banks, Bank of International Settlements, set up in Basel. The very first modern day central bank is the Bank of England, set up in the 16th century and then overtaken by the Rothschilds famously after the Battle of Waterloo. And largely since that moment, every single war, proxy or other, world or other, has been a banker's war. Smedley Butler has a famous book on this. He calls it War's a Racket. And it is not a battle just over things or a battle over philosophy or ideology. It is always a battle over the assets themselves and then the ability to control.
To control the
Because they can print the money. And Nathaniel Rothschild famously said, I care not who is king, I only want to control the money supply. That's not the pure quote.
Yeah, he said something like, care not who makes the laws, just give me the power to issue a nation's currency.
Yeah.
Give me the power to issue a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws.
Right.
Something like that.
And he's correct.
Which goes at what Jeff Booth said in that video, that money is superordinate to the rule of law, which it is, because the rule of law exists to serve private property. The whole rule of law grounds out in private property, and money is the most powerful form of private property. Basically, it gives you recourse to buy any other form of private property that anyone can produce.
Yep.
So yeah, money is the game, right? It's the meta game in a way. And it's driving all of these things.
It's the meta medium, right? For the game. Like the game of life is protect, provide for your family, hopefully lead a legacy, and then try to make better and better decisions to enhance your freedom of choice, right? And through larger capital. I mean, if we didn't have the central banks, this would be a lot easier process.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes I wake up and I'm like, wait, we all were born on Earth. Why do we have to pay to be alive? Right? That's a really fundamental question that as I get older, I keep asking myself, like, how have they compartmentalized everything to charge for existence? Right? I mean, it's largely very modern day, not like it was. And it really looks like slavery to me. And there's a quote in those notes from George Washington about that, and John Adams. Like John Adams said, there's two ways to conquer a country, one by sword and the other's by debt. Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.